Welcome, everybody, to the show. It is Counter Clipping show number 110 for February, what is it, the 6th, 2023. Tonight, we are clipping Beyond Waterloo from the late John Prados and Against the Odds magazine, which arrived a week or so ago. Now, I'm going to be exploring newfangled storage solutions for magazine games, but that is not happening right now. We'll talk about that a little bit, although I do not wish to derail the show on it. We are drinking Boulder American single malt whiskey, bottled at 46% in Colorado, which is great. It's pretty good. It's not like smoky at all, as you might expect if you haven't tried a lot of different scotches. But there are plenty of scotches that aren't smoky, but that's one of the characteristics that people say, oh, scotch is all smoky. It tastes like an ashtray. Which, I like that, but a lot of people don't. This is not smoky at all. So they didn't put any peat or anything in this thing. But it's nevertheless pretty good. So we haven't hit this bottle in quite a while. Bearing in mind that I lost my sense of taste for like 6 weeks there. And it's really just coming back relatively recently. Tonight, we're going to talk about revisiting classic games, and we're going to cover some stuff that we've talked about in recent episodes, but also some other stuff that we haven't gone into detail. And I think every game that I've picked on this list, of which there's only 15, so hopefully we can do them in a little more detail. Um, um, Every one of these I've actually played either relatively recently or back in the day. And at least one of them is something that is literally going to happen this year. So, it's not Empires in Arms, but it won't take you very long to think of what it is either. So, before we get started on that, let me remind everybody, please do thumbs up the video, subscribe to the channel, all that jazz if you're not subscribed already. Super chats and super stickers are on. That's a great way to support the channel and to get your comment highlighted in case I miss it. And we're already at almost 100 people. So that is a lot for this early, considering I did not do any of the promotional work that I sometimes am motivated sufficiently to do on this show. I will mention that all the links for all the social medias are in the video description. And I'm also going to mention that tonight and tomorrow will be the last times I stream these shows on Twitch, because we had a spammer come in and Twitch won't let me. Even I have to go to Twitch to do it. And Twitch will not let me block that person. So for the one person who watches me on Twitch, I apologize. I am not swearing off of Twitch completely, but these shows are not going to be on Twitch. If I do something on Twitch, then it will be me doing something on Twitch. These shows will continue to be on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So there's that. There is a link to the Ardwulf Lair Discord server, which has started to pick up quite a lot, actually. In the ticker, remind me to put the ticker up. It's a good thing I put that note in here so I remember to put the ticker on. There's a Discord link in the ticker, and there is an email address for me if you want to get a hold of me for whatever reason. So now that is out of the way, let us say hello to Six Actual, Alistair Logie, Andrew Frankie, Board Gaming Geezer, Brent McCabe, Chad Kennedy, Charles Latorre, E4 Airman from Southwest Ohio. Southwest, yeah, that sounds right. Farshad Niazi, Henry Sikorsky, the legendary Fucko, Jack P, James Whitmer, Jason Peterson, Jason W, Jeffrey Edwards, Joe Okabayashi, John C from the sunny Philippines, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp, Lee Grant, Manders, Mark G, Mark Dennehy, Meandering Mike, Michael Simon, Neil Bedke, Patrick from Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, Percy Block, welcome back to the stream, Perfidious Albion, Rick Cox, Tim Greenhaw, Tim Zales, Vicky, Vince Ree, William Aarons, and William Bird. So welcome, everybody. We do have a relatively small bit of wargaming news in that there are new pre-orders from Multiman Publishing, which they announced pretty recently, and they put 3 of them up already. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I will also remind everybody that there is a link in the video description to Mark Ruggiero's GoFundMe. He has started chemo as of today. His wife is also on chemo. So, whatever we can do for Mark is going to be much appreciated by them. So do check that out. So let me first do the business with the 3 new pre-orders for Multi-Man Publishing. And one of them is just something we knew we knew all these were coming, right? So let's talk about Goose Green. So this is the latest in the tactical combat series, which was on the on the chopping block a few years ago. And they decided after some discussion that they were going to try one more time to do it in a bag format, a Ziploc format with smaller games, which is, in principle fine. This is a squad or platoon level system, DNSing system. It's a very interesting system. I didn't really want to see this die. The last game they did to kind of pilot that Ziploc plan was Ariete, which is Italians in North Africa. It's actually gotten pretty good buzz for the relatively small audience that plays TCS. Goose Green here is an infantry battle in the Falklands War. That's not of tremendous interest to me, but nevertheless, there's not a terrible chance this is going to get to a table either, because at least a couple of the local fellas do like this topic. So, and it's pretty small, right? Pre-order price $24, so why not? It's probably one map and one counter sheet. Is that right? Looks like one map and half a counter sheet actually. So it's quite small. Take a look at the map here. Can I expand this tiny picture? Uh, there we go. So it's pretty small. Looks like about a half size map too. Now that I'm looking at it, I don't know if this is the final map or not. So don't ask me. Exactly. I mean, this is a really interesting system that I think has a lot of novel features. I think this is a really nice vehicle, certainly priced right to investigate this. There apparently Jeff Mueller says it's got tanks in it as well. We don't. Alexander Fontaine Rousseau, welcome back. We don't have much talk about TCS. And that's like on my to-do list of things I want to get played at some point, but it just has not yet drifted to the top. The only TCS game I've had a few pass through my hands over the years. The only one I've got right now is Black Wednesday, which is not a one mapper and half a counter sheet. It's huge. So there's scenarios though. I mean, you're not stuck playing the whole thing. But one of the things that's kept me from punching and clipping that is, frankly, how the hell am I going to get it all back in the box? Well, now I have a potential solution for that. And we'll talk about that again in a minute. The other news is one of the two reprints. This is Operational Matters. This is, as far as I'm aware, a straight reprint of the magazine plus the included game, which is um, Sicily 2, which is excellent. I like both Sicily games. They're quite different. They play quite differently. Um, Part of that is just it's a different scale, but part of that is some of the rules are different as well. Sicily 2 does represent Dean's more recent thinking on this topic. And it's an excellent game. It's a pretty good introduction to OCS. And you get the magazine, which has a bunch of good articles about different OCS games. There is an Operational Matters issue number 2 that is planned for this year as well. And of course, lots of you will know that it's like murder trying to get MMP to reprint stuff. So if you don't already have this, probably and unless you're just not interested in OCS or Sicily, I do recommend ordering it $54, which isn't bad considering it's a fairly decent sized magazine and a game. And it's not like printed on magazine stock. At least the original one wasn't printed on magazine stock either. It's more like RPG book stock. The third item is the other reprint, Rostov 41 Race to the Dawn. This is an SCS game. It was very well received and sold out quite quickly. And its pre-order price is pretty gangbusters low as well, $36. Now, I do have an unboxing of this if you want to check that out. It is one counter sheet and one map. It is a very good introduction to SCS, but the majority of SCS games are very good introductions to SCS. Reese Johnson, I believe we will see them incorporate the modest amount of errata in Sicily too. The same deal with this thing. And they put a couple things on sale, including King Philip's War, Warriors of Japan, and something else. And I didn't pull that up in advance, and I'm not going to go fishing around for it now live on the air. Mandering Mike points out that King Philip's War is sold out at $5. And those were on sale like, hey, we got to get these out of the warehouse. They're just taking up space. So for $36 here, boom. The ops sheet in Henry Sikorsky, the ops sheet is pretty unique. We've seen written orders mechanics in various places, but especially from Dean in the past. And the ops sheet is kind of a variation on that. And it's it kind of removes a little bit of the overhead, I think, from the written orders mechanic. Although I frankly like the overhead, but that's me. Sicily 2 is currently expensive. Anything for anything OCS is expensive on the secondary market once it has gone out of print. And often it is expensive on the secondary market even before it goes out of print for reasons which remain unclear to me. So, my OCS shelf, which let me pull this down for now. My OCS shelf, which you see behind me, which is up here, is now only missing two things. My Iterary Mike mentions Warriors of Japan. The King Philip's War is a Native American war in North America. I thought it was one of the King Philips of France, and then I opened the box and I'm like, oh, that's not what this is at all. I had no idea that was even a thing that occurred. So, if you want an interesting and obscure topic, King Philip's War is cool, but it's sounds like it's gone. And then Warriors of Japan is still available. There was one other one as well. Somebody will put that in the chat. And Rostov 41 also goodbye at this price, very inexpensive, and is a game that you can potentially get quite a lot of enjoyment out of. So unhesitatingly recommend that as an SCS game and as a relatively simple game. I don't like to use the beer and pretzels designation because I think it undersells it a bit. But where the hell did these go? But nevertheless, SCS is a very simple, very accessible, very easy to learn system. 8 pages of rules, you know the drill. So, um, let's see what we got here. I don't know. I picked up a copy of. I think I've already mentioned that I bought wrong way. Operation Typhoon relatively recently for a fairly reasonable price. Other new acquisitions are Fifth Core, which showed up as part of my plan. Now that may or may not get played this year, right? But at least I have it. It was not expensive. It is unpunched. It is also missing the rule book, but that is a problem I can overcome because we have that resource available to us. So, and actually, I contacted the seller, and they're going to send me the game specific rulebook. The series rulebook is in there. Andrew Frankie says the most dangerous time is the third game. I've got to, make sure I have the money for all those things on pre-order for MMP, which isn't that many things, but those things are all quite expensive. So, I have a lot more things available on pre-order from GMT, and I actually went through those pre-orders last week or something like that, or maybe over the weekend, and kind of made sure that everything on there was something that is in alignment with where I am and can afford and all that stuff. Um, or is so far out like the Barbarossa games that it's kind of irrelevant that I'll have at least a year notice before anything remotely like shipping of that game occurs. So I am blaming MMP's fine website for that catastrophe. I don't know anything about that. Pull this over just a wee bit. Okay, so let's. Do we have anything else? I guess I'll mention that like the organization update. Still working on the Develop Creek Western Front over here. It's punched and clipped, and it's all organized in 3D printed trays. But I have new trays, which will be better coming off the printer over the next couple of days to recover that. So it's going to be pretty, I think, pretty nice solution. I'm not sure what I'm going to tackle next. It may be magazine games, but it may be Third World War. Now that I have moved to the 9/16 inch trays again, so. Um, Carrier Battles Philippines C has begun to show up in people's hands. I am aware of that. Saint Mariglis, I believe Fucko and maybe some other folks mentioned that has shown up as well. I ended up canceling the pre-order for Saint Mariglis. It wasn't particularly expensive, but it's like, it's another ASL historical. It's not like I don't have just a god ton of ASL material to play. If I'm going to play ASL, I'm going to play it with ASL people who have all this stuff anyway. So it didn't seem to me to be like a necessity for me to acquire it. So I just said I'll save the money in this case, and of course I didn't save the money. I spent it on something else. But anyway, um, so before we get to anything else, let's see what we have. I got to pull this up. There we go. 1776. Now we've talked about this before. I had it in my head for some reason. I think because it's a very similar system to War and Peace, but it actually predates War and Peace by a few years. And this is a Randall Reed design, 1776. There were a couple different editions, and it was often the case with Avalon Hill. There were differences between those editions. I don't believe they rise to the level of we completely redid the thing, which was the case with things like Gettysburg and Anzio and things like that. By the time you get to fourth edition Anzio, it's a pretty different game from the older ones. So this is a pretty neat game, American Revolution game. I don't have a lot of games on the American Revolution. I'm kind of trying to do the shelves. And of course, this is waiting for the rest of the shelves to get done. I'm kind of waiting to like organize the shelves of war games into quote unquote collections. Michael Kirk, thanks for coming back. David Thompson, thanks for stopping by. Much appreciated. We will see you pretty soon at Buckeye Game Fest. Tony Mammal. Well, I could get to squad leader next, I suppose, because it's actually on this list. And not all these are like things I'm gonna go play. And actually, squad leader was the example of one that I'm not. And I'll explain why. So, a company called Renegade Games did announce that they had acquired rights for a number of things from Hasbro that were attached to classic Avalon Hill titles. Diplomacy was one of those things, which Hasbro has actually kept in print. We're all in love with Hasbro right now, as you're aware. So, one of those things was Squad Leader, and very swiftly we heard, people started asking Multi-Man, what does this mean for Multi-Man? And the answer was nothing. We don't have a license for Squad Leader. Advanced Squad Leader is its own completely separate thing, which is, true. Now, what that looks like when Renegade Games decides they're going to do a Squad Leader product, if in fact they do, is kind of up in the air. I mean, maybe it'll look like the original Squad Leader, or maybe it'll be a little game with miniatures and look a lot more like Axis and Allies, and it just says Squad Leader on a box. I don't know. They're not a very well established company, as far as I know. So it will be interesting to see what they do with those properties, but I am not going to get. There's not going to be loss of sleep on my part in the meantime. Yeah, I like that better. We'll keep that up. Now that I got the big pictures, this wouldn't work with the small pictures. So this is a pretty nice game, and I had this back in the day, and I reacquired it at some point in the last couple of years. I might have gotten it off of Fucko actually, and it's I think I feel like it's a game that will hold up fairly well. That said, I've got a number of other games on the American Revolution at this rough scale by this point, including Liberty or Death, which is of course a coin game, so it's quite different. But I also have Gilbert Collins' War for America, which I know a lot of people have chafed on the rulebook for, but I have really not delved into it. I know that Gilbert has done some teach and play sessions that he did at Compass Expo, and I know that he has done some video on it, and there's been some rulebook revisions. So I think that by the time I get to it, I'm pretty sure it will be fine. So let's make sure that we have, okay, turn this off so I don't have constant donging during the show. So Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. Mo, welcome. Hopefully everybody got to see the show with Matt from the Historical Board Game Awards and Harold from the SD HistCon Summit Award. That was last night. I plan to get a unboxing video out on Thursday, but it is not uploaded yet, so you can't count on it. Don't put your money on it. But I have scheduled a interview for Friday. I double booked Sunday, so I apologize to everybody who got boned on this. I have rescheduled the interview with Justin Facino of Seljuk for Friday evening, so we're going to hit that at approximately 9 p.m. Eastern time, of course. There we go. I hope that it was good because I kind of wanted, I wanted to steal their ideas, right? That was the idea. Updated 1776 counter set. So are we talking about something that's on BGG, or is that something that somebody is like selling somewhere? Because I've seen both for various games. Like there's still people selling new boards, counters, all that stuff for Panzer Blitz, for example. That was not Kilroy. If all you saw were eyes and a nose, that was probably Dan, actually. So Carl says he read the rules and played it and didn't see what the big deal was. I haven't really looked at it that closely. My exposure to it is actually having watched all of Gilbert's videos on it, which I was very excited by. I was like, oh, this looks cool. A American Revolution game from somebody who is not American. Unless it's somebody from Germany or something like that, then maybe that's not going to be interesting. But if it's like a British or Canadian designer, that's right off the top, that's something I would like to see. 1776 does have the glossier counters, and Avalon Hill in the course of the 70s kind of floated back and forth on that. I was picking through Freddy the Great, my Avalon Hill copy of Freddy the Great, and I think there's reasons to prefer the Avalon Hill game and reasons to play the Avalon Hill game on the SPI map. So it's one of those one-piece Avalon Hill boards. Frederick the Great. 1776 was not. At least my copy was not. Those one-piece boards were really, really bad quality. And in the case of Frederick the Great, it's also got the really, really high matte counters, which is something that I remember from Conquistador. And I like matte counters, but there's concerns about how well they will wear. So I do actually like a little bit of gloss on counters for that reason, but I also like the feel of matte counters. I think the most interesting thing in that particular space right now is the counter stock that is being used over at Thin Red Line. I don't know that I've heard them talk about that, but there is some kind of matte coating on those that makes them feel really, really very nice and somewhat akin to old SPI counters, without necessarily feeling like if I my there's any oil on my finger at all, then I am going to stain the counter. So, so there is this is a seven, I believe 1974 release, and there was a 75 and 76 editions, and 76 edition is the one with the big bicentennial notice on the front. I am not really sure what the differences are, but I can tell you that the one that I have reacquired is this one. It has this cover, so it's not the bicentennial one. But there is also an updated rule book available on BGG. It's like 60 pages, 60 plus pages, where this original was had a fairly tidy little rule book. But then again, the new one, well, I don't know. I haven't sat down and compared the two. We put it that way. Yeah. So there's a matte counters from New England Simulations. Those are really nice too. Those are just matte though. They don't have some kind of special coating on them. They just feel really good. Generally speaking, I am very happy with the presentational standard that New England Simulations has come up with. All right, we have talked about this, I think, last week. So, as we mentioned, this is a Richard Berg game. There is another Richard Berg game called Blackbeard that was done later by GMT, which is really a complete throw this away and completely redesign it. That later game I had and I did not care for. This I played back in the day and enjoyed very much. But like I said before, this is kind of a pirate ship simulator, right? It will also play. Now, some people won't like that, right? But if you are kind of capable of drawing the narrative out of the game, a pretty mechanistic game, by the way, then I think you will enjoy this. It's probably better enjoyed solitaire than it is enjoyed multiplayer, which is the way it was originally designed as multiplayer. I think there's a chance there'll be too much sitting around with 4 or 5 players. But you could totally do this solitaire. It's a lot like a number of other Avalon Hill games that play that way. Source of the Nile's one. Um, Outdoor Survival is one where it's multiplayer, but who cares? You can just play it solitaire and have a great time. So the GMT version was on GMT Fire Sale for a long time. It was not. Oh, this is not an especially highly rated game. A lot of people didn't like this. I did. So, take that for what it's worth. But the the later GMT game called Blackbeard was even lower rated than this Avalon Hill original. And great cover, by the way. Not sure who did the cover. I think I see a GP or a CP or something like that on there. But it's quite a nice cover. Better than the cover for the GMT version, I think. So this is one we play every year, frankly. We played it last year. We'll probably play it this year. It is great. This is a game from the late great S. Craig Taylor. Flat Top came from Battleline, moved to Avalon Hill. Lots and lots and lots of hidden information and plotted movement and stuff like that. So if somebody is going to tell me that they did not enjoy Flat Top because of the paperwork, and I am completely prepared to accept that criticism. It is a very paperworky game. That said, I don't mind the paperwork. So, and it's a great Roger McGowan cover. I will also mention. Um, and this is one. It's this flat box game. You're never getting it all back in the box. We've talked quite a bit about flat top over the course of the show, so we're not really going to belabor the point here. I think it's great. Actually, Henry Sikorsky, we actually talked about Knights of the Air last week or the week, or I believe it was last week. It's a World War One dogfighting game. It's less fondly remembered than Richthofen's War. I'm not sure if that's justified or not. Um, Ricky's War was like a formational game for a lot of war gamers. So there's like tremendous nostalgia around it. Knights of the Air was much later. And I think it doesn't have that nostalgia factor, and that may be why it's not as well remembered. Now there were leader counters that were with the variant there were variant leader counters for 1776. That is actually true. Hmm. And I'll also mention Empire's in Arms is not on this list because I've already kind of talked that to pieces, having not played it yet. Hopefully, we'll get some play in. Um, there's was a lot of supplemental material for Empires in Arms, up to and including like scenarios that let you start the whole thing in 1792. So now how that works from like a flow standpoint, it's like there's kind of a thing happens in there that dramatically changes the landscape, and I'm not sure how it handles that. But there were a lot of variant scenarios for Empires in Arms floating around, many of which appeared in the general, but there were just some floating around on the internet. There was a very very active Empires in Arms in email group at one point, that I think that's where Empires in Harm came out of. And then that got sold off to Matrix. That was available for a while, and then it got sold off to Matrix Games. You can still find older versions of it. That became the foundation of their Empires in Arms computer game, which I actually bought on the sale. Haven't even installed it yet. Double blind naval war games. Yeah, we're kind of seeing a bit of a renaissance in this topic in like Pacific naval war games. I think in the last couple of years, and I would really like to see um, somebody who is doing something that's more an heir to flat top than an heir to say Typhoon, the card game. Um, and right now, that's looking like Beneath the Southern Cross from Bill Cooper and Compass Games. So I'm very interested in that. But I'm also very interested in Divine Wind, also coming from Compass Games, hopefully coming on pre-order sometime this year. So, and very playable by email, very playable double blind. A lot of the game's mechanics take care of the things that the hidden information. So it's not necessary to play it with a referee, but a referee will enhance the experience. I can attest to that. Apparently, there's some kind of rocket going up. I don't know anything about that. Freedom in the Galaxy. This is, I want to say, Howard Barish, John Butterfield design. Uh, Started at SPI, went to Avalon Hill. I've got the SPI version because I wanted the map that laid flat and not that garbage map that doesn't lay flat. This is a really pretty neat game. There is not exactly programmed instruction, but there's like a basic, intermediary, and advanced games. You do kind of have the ability to kind of ramp your way up into what ends up being a fairly complicated game. Now, Neil Badke calls this Star Wars the role playing game, and he's not wrong, right? This is very much Star Wars with all of the serial numbers very carefully and thoroughly filed off. It is an extremely Star Wars esque setting. But the interesting thing here is there's a whole setting here, right? It's not just like here's a card with Lance Sky Smasher or something like that, right? They actually took the time to kind of work a lot of this stuff out. So there's like a whole little setting book with little vignettes and stuff in it. This is actually quite a fascinating game, and if you really wanted to get into this, um, I think you could spend a lot. I think you could lose a lot of hours in Freedom in the Galaxy, to be honest about it. And the campaign game will take a while to play. This is another one with well, they wanted to use the Gorns instead of the Wookiees, right? That was the whole point. I think there's a dog species in here too, but they're a little less prominent. Rob Johnson says he thinks it was a precursor to coin games. That's actually a really interesting point. Um, I know that Volko is a fan of a lot of these old SPI games. I wonder, and I'd be curious to ask him if this was an influence on the development of coin, because it is kind of an area control game, and it's not like it's not the first implementation of that idea, right? At least not as I don't think it is. This is actually a really good point. Yeah, because remember, there was a lot of stuff floating around about Star Wars before we actually saw the movie. That was pretty different from the movie we actually ended up seeing. Um, there's some interesting things here. So I would personally like to get back to this. That is a probably 20. Honestly, it's probably 2024 project on the at this point in 2023. And I realize we're in February, but I've got a lot staked out for the rest of the year. So, um, who has the rights to reprint it? That's a great question. My guess is that the rights reside with Hasbro, because remember this was sold to Avalon Hill, and they picked up all the rights. Now, some of the science fiction stuff from SPI did end up passing to Decision Games. Star Force, Star Soldier, and Outreach did, I believe. At least there has been noise out of Decision Games about redoing, and I do mean redoing. I don't mean doing a new edition of. I mean hand it off to somebody inside Decision Games and or not they're not inside, they're freelancers, but and have them completely redesign it from the ground up, ignoring everything that came before. And I because those specific games are games I liked, I'm not a fan of that technique in this case. Maybe there's a flawed classic SPI game that you could take and tweak and maybe give it a bunch more additional play testing and fine tuning and all that. That'd be great. Decision has literally never done that. It's either been a straight reprint or a complete redesign. Um, I'm willing to be corrected on that, but I don't recall anything. All right. My voice is getting a little stronger now, by the way. It's still a little rough. All right, Imperium. This is a game that is attached to Traveler, but actually predates Traveler as a thing. And its setting was actually kind of retrofitted into Traveler the RPG relatively quickly. I'm a little unclear as to what the relationship between Conflict Games and Game Designers Workshop was. So, a number of early GDW games were also published by Conflict Games, according to Board Game Geek. Um, and this is the only one I've actually handled in the Conflict Games box. It looks identical to the GDW flat box original, other than saying Conflict Games on the side. I mean, it's otherwise identical. This is a later cover. This is the cover that appeared in the Mega Traveler era. That would have been in the late 80s or early 90s. So post 19, I think somewhere between 1987 and 1992 sounds about right. Um, so this is True, but consult your IP attorney on that. It really does depend on what the terms were that the original work was done. I would love to see this game redone. This is a very strong game. You could easily expand it. And GDW did. I mean, they did Dark Nebula, which is basically this system in the Dark Nebula sector instead of in the Soleimani Rim. You could easily expand this to make some kind of huge Imperium mega campaign. I think that would be really cool. Um, or you could just not touch it. There was a redo of this from Avalanche Press, weirdly enough, um, called Imperium New Millennium. It did not go over well. It made a lot of significant changes to the system. Now, I played it, I think, once and didn't dislike it. It added in, it redid, but then re-added in one of the optional rules that had shown up somewhere, which has like little planetary mini maps of all the planetary systems. And you do the ground assaults on it. I'm not sure that's a great idea at this scale, but I don't object to it either. And the Imperium game graphics in this case were actually really nice. Both the counters and the map are really very nice. At some point, I will do a video on this. I really should. I think Imperium Third Millennium gets a little bit of an unfair hit because they did make some changes that were ill-advised, but they also made it really pretty. And I think it's still a good game. It's just the changes were not necessary. So 149 people watching. Holy cow. Last night on Twitch, folks. So if you're watching on Twitch, you're going to have to hop over to YouTube from now on for this show. I'm not closing the Twitch channel or anything. I'm just not broadcasting these regular shows that draw a lot of people. I'm not putting up with spammers that I can't do anything with because Twitch doesn't let me do that. So, Mark Miller's Big Book of Traveler Games. Jeff, I'm curious as to exactly what product you're talking about there. Because if so, I might have it and I might not. And if I don't, then I want it. So I do know that Shannon Appelkline is working on a history of Traveler. He's the fella who did the Designers and Dragons, like 5 or 6 book set. That's a monumental work. I think only comparable to John Peterson's Playing at the World, and not really that comparable because they're really very different books. The Designers and Dragons books are a popular history, where Playing at the World it's much more of an academic treatment of that topic, but super duper valuable. But focuses very tightly on Dungeons and Dragons too. So, Chad, if it's okay if you hit the thumbs down, because that counts exactly the same for the algorithm as a thumbs up does. So if you really don't like somebody, don't give them a thumbs down. Just turn the video off. So, all right. So 79 thumbs. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And we got good numbers here. All right. So what's next? Outreach. We've talked about this before too. This is an Irad Hardy design. Now, this has an interesting kind of provenance in that it's part of the Star Force trilogy, which was Star Force, Star Soldier, and Outreach. And those are 3 quite different games that share a common but very loose science fiction future. Okay, a future history, if you will. For those who don't know, by the way, the band, the 80s new wave band, Human League, got their name from one of the factional powers in Star Force. And that Human League, the name might be dropped somewhere in Outreach as well. But Outreach is much farther in the future, and the map is basically the entire Milky Way galaxy. Okay, the turns are generational turns. It is absolutely fascinating. It has enormous scope. There is nothing like this. Nobody has done anything else like this, which is why when decisions started making noise about maybe redoing it, I was initially excited, until then I found out that it was going to be another complete redesign, which frankly I am simply far less interested in. Because I think this original game, and the graphics aren't terrible, right? I didn't pull up any graphics on any of this stuff. But the graphics aren't terrible, but they're this is SPI 1978, something like 77, something like that. So they're not fancy. Um, but this is a really interesting, really novel game. This game is one of the reasons why I feel like Irad Hardy was somebody who's also somewhat underrated as a designer. I think he did some really interesting things. Where's the lid? Not to say that everything was a winner. That would be an overstatement. But not everything Jim Dunnigan did was a winner either. So, but the really interesting game. Does not take a million years to play. It is a bit bookkeepy, but it is certainly not. Um, it's not like flat top levels of bookkeeping, or even Stellar Conquest levels of bookkeeping, which is a game I liked a lot back in the day. But it's not on this list, and I'm not sure who the hell are these guys. Italians, okay. So the Prussians here, this is Waterloo, beyond Waterloo. The British are in red, which is expected. The French are in blue, which is expected, and the Prussians are in a very slightly different shade of blue, which is kind of annoying, actually. We are going to work on. I don't know if even want to do this because it's going to be a huge amount of work. 3D printed counter trace solutions for magazine games specifically, but that will be to like absolutely maximize storage on this stuff. So we'll deal with that at another time. Ah, very good. Okay, yeah. So there's some commentary. I want to say I'm not sure it's that particular volume, but a couple of mine are actually signed by Mark. Those are the reprints that were done directly by Far Future Enterprises, and I think I'm missing one of them, and I'm not sure those are still available. My guess would be that they are not. And last I checked, I believe they were expensive. I may actually have duplicates of some of them as well. Um, this is an interesting statement because I wouldn't mind seeing something like this out of somebody like Amabel or somebody else that would work with Hollenspiel, which kind of goes out of their way to do. They do some pretty straight war games, but they also do a lot of interesting and offbeat things with novel mechanics. Um, and the folks who are publishing through Hollenspiel are actually good at novel mechanics. The folks who are trying to do novel mechanics over at Decision are, in my opinion, not. So, and this there's a pretty good image on the BGG page for Outreach. So you could see the map. And there's also a redone map, which I actually like less than the original map, to be honest about it. I believe that Outreach, especially Star Force, really cannot be played solitaire. It's pre-plotted hidden movement. You will have a terrible experience playing it solitaire. Outreach, on the other hand, does not do that, and you can absolutely play this solitaire, and it will play very well. There's actually there's rules in there for these like non-player minor factions that might pop up, and you run into them and have to deal with them. This is actually really pretty cool. Um, a game that I think really has legs, really underrated. I think a very strong game. I had a hell of a time getting a copy too. Panzer Blitz. So I've had the soapbox. I wouldn't mind having the soapbox, by the way, of the Star Force trilogy because that's what I actually had back in the day. But then it got destroyed by mold. That's not actually true. I think Star Force and Star Soldier. Star Soldier is, in my opinion, the least interesting of the three. Um, but Star Force is pretty interesting, but not necessarily like fun and that you'd play it a lot. But Outreach you could play a lot. Um, I believe I got rid of Star Force and Star Soldier at some point previously, and I think probably um the that Jeff, that is not the one I'm missing. I think I'm missing the third JTOS volume. I absolutely have the one with the games in it, and I got all the other ones as well. Um, so this is yeah, this is correct. So the imagined future of Star Force is kind of like a telepathic FTL type of thing. So later on, that gets extrapolated a little further in Outreach, but this is it's not really solid terrible. Could you do it? Yeah, you'd be losing. There wouldn't be any point, right? Um, so if you're just trying to like learn the game, go ahead, solitaire it. But if you're actually trying to play the game and would like to get some enjoyment out of it, not recommended. All right, so moving along. I agree with Mark McNair's statement here. Star Force was more interesting in theory than in play. I think Star Force is worth a couple of plays. I think it is. It's interesting enough to merit a couple of plays. But nobody is going to like set up a Star Force tournament, right? I mean, maybe that happened back in the day as a promotional thing, but nobody nowadays is going to set up a Star Force tournament or Star Force League or whatever. That's just not going to happen. It's one of those games that you play it and you're like, yeah, this is actually quite neat, but it's not necessarily maximizing the fun. And so it doesn't necessarily have a ton of replay value. Let me put that more firmly. It has relatively low replay value. Let me put it that way. Outreach has more replay value. Actually think Star Soldier probably has more replay value than Star Force, but it was less interesting. All right. So Panzerblitz. There's some really interesting things about this design. Of course, this originates in 1970. Jim Dunnigan over at SPI, and it migrates its way to Avalon Hill as Panzerblitz with the iconic Roger McGowan cover. Okay, really iconic cover. I mean, I think we'll all have to agree this is a great cover. Why am I not focused? Damn it, you stupid machine. Um, this is another one of those games. There's a lot of games like this, and we've mentioned a lot of them over the last few weeks. That got played so much that people played them so much that they really found all the big holes in them. Okay, and Panzer Blitz is one of those games. Third Reich is one of those games. So that's part of the reason why the rules then change in Panzer Leader, which is the extension of the Panzer Blitz game to the West Front, and then Arab-Israeli Wars then takes that engine and transposes it to the Arab-Israeli Wars in the 70s. So very popular game. At one point, this was like the #1 selling war game of all time. It's a historic game. It's one of those things that I think every serious war gamer should play at least once. I personally don't, and I have it, and I'm not getting rid of it. But um, I personally probably wouldn't go back to this. I think if you want a tank game, if you want an easy tank game, I think there's better easy tank games. If you want a platoon level game, I think there's better platoon level games. If you want or platoon or squad, I guess. Um, if you want a detailed tank game, there's much better solutions. But plenty of people are still playing Panzer Blitz too, so bear that in mind. And graphically, it's pretty strong for when it appeared as well. So, and this is Kilroy. If Kilroy is here. Yes, actually, I meant to mention this. Matt Davidson mentions. So, Star Force is a Redmond Simonson design, and it's a really serious simulation of what a future history might look like. I say, okay, so we're going to extrapolate this future history, and we're going to be a little bit fanciful about it with the telepathic FTL and all that. But then, how do we design a conflict simulation based on that extrapolation? It's a very serious look at that, and that's a big part of the reason why I think it's as interesting as it is. Outreach is a extrapolation of the same future history, but the game design there is Irene Hardy. Trying to catch up on the comments here. Tim Sales started with Squad Leader, which we'll get to in a minute. Miss Panzerblitz and Panzer Leader played the heck out of AIW. Arab Israeli Wars. Okay. Worth your time. Worth your time as like, hey, I want to try this classic old game. This is one of the timeless classics of wargaming, and we should all give it a shot. And it's like 6 pages. It's not even a rule book. It's a rules pamphlet, like a fold out map type of thing, which I actually have in a number of Avalon Hill games of the era. Um, so it's really light. It's not going to take you long to learn. It's certainly not going to take you long to play. So absolutely worth your time if you are seriously interested in this topic. I think I would go with a modern solution if you want to get like a lot of replay value out of it. And that's not a criticism of Panzerblitz's replay value because clearly it has a lot of replay value, right? But I think there's better solutions now. Mark McNair just acquired them recently. Sweet. Perfidious Albion. Okay, Panzer Grenadiers. That's the Avalon Hill. Avalon Hill. That's the Avalanche Press platoon level game. Same scale as Panzer Blitz, by the way. And frankly, I think that Panzer Grenadier's biggest liability that isn't components is just that it's kind of flat. I found it just kind of boring. West End's tank leader, Perfidious Albion mentioned. Now, I've never really taken a close look at this, but this is coming back from Compass, so it is possible that it will get another look at some point. So my understanding, having not looked closely at Panzer Blitz Hill of Death by MMP, is that it does not exactly use the Panzer Blitz system. The other one that's being worked on is being worked on by Sharon Boyd, Panzer Blitz East Front, I think it's called. Um, and that's been in the cooker for a while now. When I was at Winter Offensive a couple of years ago, it's my only Winter Offensive. Sharon was there demoing and or play testing it to a decent amount of attention. So I am not a tremendous fan of Panzer Grenadier, but I also don't want to spend a ton of time talking about games I don't like. So Paratroop. I've mentioned this before, but it's probably been a while, maybe not that long. This was my first war game, was S&T number 77, and I believe this is 1979. So I think that means that it was not new when I got it, by the way. I am positive that as a 9-year-old or so, I did not do the rules correctly. But nevertheless, I thought it was really neat. A couple of years ago, I reacquired a copy of this from our good friends at Enterprise Games. There it sits awaiting organization of the magazine games. This is 3 different games by 3 different designers. They're all pretty small. So it's kind of like a mini quad in that respect, other than that there's no quad, right? It's a try, but it's kind of a mini multi-pack, which is not a magazine format. For we've seen a number of examples of this. Like the thing I'm clipping right now is like everything you buy from Against the Odds has like 3 or 4 different games in it, right? There's usually a main game, a side game, and then you get some postcard games with them as well. So even Emil Crete is pretty cool, and Red Devils is the British First Airborne in Arnhem, right? So these are interesting looking designs. Now looking at them now, right? Not having seen this since probably 1981. So it would be kind of like for me personally, it would kind of be like the ultimate expression of, kind of going back to a game from my literal childhood, and seeing what I thought of that game now as somebody with a lot more life experience, but also a fair amount more wargaming experience as well, right? Many of the maps for Panzer Grenadier are atrocious. The counters are generally pretty nice. Squad leader. Okay. I might surprise folks by saying that if you set aside the difficulty in getting a copy, which is no longer trivial. Now they printed something like 600,000 of these, as I recall. This became the number one selling war game, where it might even still be, for all I know. But the interesting thing here is so what you have is a game that was considered fairly complicated at the time, right? And I think that's an accurate statement. It was considered fairly It was fairly complicated for its time. Okay. So in order to partially address that, they set the scenarios up as this programmed instruction thing where you had these, here's a scenario with just some guys walking around in the woods and maybe you take a shot. Here's a scenario that adds support weapons, and you kind of gradually over the course of 12 scenarios, I believe I may have misremembered it as 10 talking about it previously. Um, these Austrians. Over the course of 12 scenarios, you gradually learn the game. And by the 12th scenario, you know the game and can play a big scenario, and that's cool. The problem with it is that you have then exhausted the potential of the scenarios in the box, right? Because all the scenarios are programmed instruction scenarios, and only the last like one or two like unleash you with the full power of the game system in your hands. So the box itself is really highly dependent on additional scenario support, which did appear over the course of time, but it took a long time. And by that time, a lot of that scenario support depended on things like Cross of Iron or Crescendo of Doom or GI or Anvil of Victory or whatever. And by that time, the game system's fairly crufted up. So the um, kind of the virtue that helped it be a lot easier for people to learn, which I actually think was a huge factor in Squad Leader's popularity, um, is also a liability in terms of returning to it, right? Because if you say to yourself, I don't want to deal with the ASL overhead or the ASL crowd or whatever it is that you don't like about ASL. I would really like something that returns to the squad leader level of detail and community. And you can do that with ASL Starter Kit, which has more scenarios, gets better support from MMP. So I think at this point, if that is what you want, I think you're better off going with ASL Starter Kit and just sticking with that, and not bothering with full ASL. Hell of a first step. Yeah, I would agree. But I mean, one of the brilliant things about this is the maybe best in class at the time, and I think it holds up pretty well now, is that programmed instruction, right? Um, that had to have been a huge factor in why this game was as popular as it was, because you could really like legitimately teach yourself to play it out of the box with or without an opponent or a tutor, right? I agree with the statement that this is an iconic cover. Obviously, this is a Roger McGowan cover. The back cover is pretty cool too. I think it might have been the back cover more than the front cover that sold me on it when I bought it off the shelf. But what I dimly recall was a KB Toys, but I could be wrong about that. If you haven't played Squad Leader, I think it's another one of those games that you should experience as a wargamer. But I think you can get that essential experience with ASL Starter Kit number whatever you want, rather than necessarily having to run down a copy of Squad Leader 77 or whenever it came out. So I would recommend that. We are actually going to move start. So next week is going to be Best of Avalon Hill part. I think it's going to be part 5. It's going to be the last one. We're going to get through it. It's actually less than we handled in part 4, so I think that's not going to be a problem. And then after that, we're going to return to topics that are a little more contemporary, because I feel like at this point we've spent a lot of time on classic stuff from GDW and SPI and Avalon Hill, and I'd like to move on to stuff that's more up to date. The expansion scenarios were worth buying, and that's for exactly the reason I gave you. Just as you were like being given the whole tool set, you ran out of scenarios, which is another reason why Crescendo of Doom and Cross of Iron and Giant Victory were so popular, because they had more scenarios, and there were scenarios in the general, but not right away, as I recall. I'm not sure that occurred to anybody right away. What is the difference in the ASL starter kits? So ASL is at this point, it's got a lot of the same infrastructure and ideas, but the execution is very different in almost every way. Which is better for a cover, purple or amber? I believe the purple cover is rare. If you're going for it for collectability, go for purple. Otherwise, go for amber. The purple cover is just weird. Squad Leader was designed by John Hill. So what the ASL starter kits are is a distillation of ASL, okay? But at the level at which you're getting the detail, it's very comparable to Squad Leader, but it's cleaner. Certainly cleaner than you ended up the state that Squad Leader was in once you started adding in the expansions. ASL starter kit number 1 gives you Russians, Americans, and Germans, and gives you infantry, support weapons, and leaders. ASL starter kit, squad leader starter kit number 2 gives you guns, and I want to say it might give you the British and or Italians, something like that. The SK3 gives you vehicles. SK4 gives you the Pacific, which brings in concealment. And unfortunately, not snipers. I was hoping for snipers as well, but we didn't get that. So that's another thing is you can play the DIY scenarios, and you did get DIY rules to design your own scenarios in Squad Leader, but I was never as satisfied with the DIY scenarios as I was with the historical scenarios. I mean, that's the history that's interesting to me, not the stuff I made up. So, and there are no second floors in the SL starter kits. That's true too, but nobody cares about that. That's a that is just an artifact. You could easily have a regular ASL scenario with no second floors, right? And you could see some guys playing it in the mess room in the final countdown on the aircraft carrier. That's true. Do the starter kits build on each other? All of the starter kits except number 4 are standalone. So you don't need number 1. You can just get starter kit number 3. Now, I think you want number 1 because, first of all, the scenarios in it are pretty good. And so they don't really use programmed learning as such, but it functionally works exactly the same way. But I think you get 6 scenarios in ASL Starter Kit number 1. It might be 8, but I'm remembering it 6. So there's no like there are some easier scenarios and some harder scenarios, but the rule book's only like 24 pages. It's not like you can't figure it out. And the rule, some people have said they really think that that rule book is bad. I question whether they've ever seen a bad rule book. Bypass movement is something that is not in the ASL starter kit, and it is important in full ASL. I obviously, and snipers, I concur. I think snipers are more important, but bypass movement is important too. Um, if you want to step up to full ASL and you're pretty familiar with ASL starter kit, you'll be well equipped to do that. But if you don't feel like it, you don't have to. So, and I think there's enough there, certainly enough scenarios now, so that if you just want to play starter kit stuff, you can just play starter kit stuff. And there's tons of material on YouTube for it as well, obviously. Okay, the Third World War. So, this was a Frank Chadwick design from GDW back in the mid 80s or maybe late 80s. Battle for Germany, Arctic Front, Balkan Southern Front, and Persian Gulf. Of which Persian Gulf is the last, but it's the first chronologically. So this imagines a relatively thinly imagined NATO versus Warsaw Pact, Cold War gone hot scenario. Okay, but the difference here is it came in, it came original. I played the original. We're gonna play the new one at Origins this year. So if you're interested, come by the Wargaming area at Origins. Um, hmm. So the interesting thing here is that so the first game was Battle for Germany. Okay, it's a one map game, and the um, GDW maps at the time were small, relatively small, so maybe even half size. So they were relatively small. So it's not a huge game. It plays surprisingly quickly. Um, but then you got a number of additional add-on maps, right? That Arctic Front, which is Scandinavia, Southern Front, which is the Balkans, and Persian Gulf, which is the Persian Gulf. And of the 4, Persian Gulf happens the first chronologically. You actually have it's card assisted. You have sort of a card assisted prologue and early game in which the NATO forces and Warsaw Pact forces decide exactly how they're going to mobilize and how that's going to affect their diplomacy. And you play these cards to reflect that affects those gear ups. So it's really quite neat. I have heard some criticisms of the new edition from Compass Games, and I find that a little bit baffling. I have what appears to me to be zero issues with the Compass Games edition, other than that it took a lot longer than anybody wanted. That's an accurate statement, but it's here, and I'm real happy with it. So I mean I understand folks getting annoyed if they waited too long for it, but I am at the same time really happy with it. So It does if we had to wait. It's not like we didn't have stuff to play, right? So, um, what is that? Spain? That's Spain. See how far we get into this. This is a counter sheet and a half, and we're in. There's a number of really interesting things going on here, and I think this shows the evolution of Frank Chadwick as a designer. Same fella involved in the design of Europa back in the day, and boy, the air system, and you can see there's a design heritage shared here, right? Between this and Europa. But man, air system night and day, right? This is absolutely worlds better than the air system, very close to absolutely intolerable air system as found in Europa, right? Which is such a huge drag on the game. Um, we actually got wooden ships and Iron Men on this. On this, thank you, E4 Airman. I appreciate it. The We have wooden ships and Iron Men on this list as well. So, European theater games based on the Gulf Strike system. Not that I'm aware of, other than Aegean Strike. But that would be interesting. And Gulf Strike as a game that a topic I wouldn't be interested in, were it as hypothetical as it was when it came out, right? But it became non-hypothetical at some point, and then they later did a post Desert Storm version of it. So I actually wouldn't mind trying Gulf Strike, and I don't have any Victory games on this list. But of the stuff I don't have, probably one of most interest to me at this time, based on many different factors, is probably Gulf Strike. And one of those factors is it coming back from Compass? And I haven't heard anything about Gulf Strike or Aegean Strike coming back from Compass. So Mo, feel free to correct me on that. Yeah, so we got asymmetric sequence of play in here as well. Uh, we've got an air system that really feels like you're fighting the air war for air supremacy over Central Europe without necessarily making it feel like you're doing this gigantic slog, which I appreciated very much. Craig Campbell says the next war air system is similar to Third World War. I don't think so, particularly. If we're saying the basic next war air system, then yeah, that I'll buy. But the advanced next war air system, no, that's its own thing. This is not very complicated air system, nor is it difficult to play. And in general, this game plays very well and very smoothly. So the this series was worth people's time, but it was hard to recommend when saying, oh yeah, you should go run down these games that all cost $150 a piece from the late 80s. I'm not sure, given that factor. That's always a factor when I say I recommend this game, right? And I'm not sure that, given that challenge, it's what was quite worth that, unless you already happen to have it. Then yes, by all means, try it. So I mean, we played this a few years ago. We played this back in the day on the originals. And then we'll be delighted to bust out the new Compass version, which is gorgeous. I'm really, really happy with it. I can't wait to overproduce a 3D printed storage solution for it. It is a terrific product, and obviously we'll be playing the new one. So it'll be also nice at Origins to play something that's a little less remote and unavailable than say a Europa game that had been out of print of 30 years and you can't touch it for less than about $400. So I'm not sure if that's John. Hopefully that's on your side, not on mine. I'm not seeing any problems over here, which doesn't mean a thing, by the way. Stream Health says it's okay. We're still doing pretty good people wise too, so I haven't bored too many people away. That is a bonus. All right. So we do have someone watching on Twitch. Let me say one last time, unless I say it right at the end, that this is the last night we will be putting this show on Twitch, because I had spammers in here the other day and I was not able to get rid of them because Twitch wouldn't let me. So, and I actually went over to Twitch and tried to do that. So we'll have to do this on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter from now on. So sorry, Twitch person who watches. So I apologize for that. So there are expansions planned for the Third World War series, and that team was at Compass Expo once again, showing some of that material off, and it looks very interesting. That's and I'll be happy to buy it. So whatever they'll have my support on that. But this is also a magnificent standalone package that I am delighted to own on its own as well. So just be glad I'm not broadcasting in 4K. I actually could broadcast in 4K, but I don't trust my bandwidth enough to do that. So, ah, all right. All right. Next up is Victory in the Pacific. This is, of course, a classic. This is a Richard Hamblin game design, if I'm not mistaken. And I first played this not back in the day, but about 8 or 9 years ago, I want to say. And I was pretty surprised. Maybe it wasn't that long ago because I had already at least tried to play Empire of the Sun at that point. And I was pretty surprised to see the obvious influence that this has had directly or indirectly on a game like Empire of the Sun. I mean, this game was very influential. Now it is somewhat beer and pretzels, right? And I hate using that term, but I think it does apply here. It's not very detailed. It nevertheless takes longer to play than I think it should. I think you should be able to play a game like this in 2 to 3 hours. It's more like a 4 to 8 hour game, in my experience. Uh, so but other than that, it's an excellent game, very solid. It's quite hard to get this for a reasonable price unpunched. And again, this is another one where it's because people played this to death. Um, and people still playing this today, right? Will play very well, via Vassal or whatever. So this would actually play maybe okay with Tabletop Simulator. I don't know. You're kind of pushing a lot of ships around. Of course, this is a follow-up to War at Sea, also a Richard Hamblin design, which I believe was itself a follow-up to Victory at Sea. There are a number of efforts in the works or recently in the works to redo these games. Compass has something coming, I believe, a Victory at Sea, and there's the recent Admiral's War from Canvas Temple Publishing, which I have an unboxing video of, which is pretty nice and which combines both games and gives you a global game so you can play out the whole global ocean war. I'm not convinced that's worthwhile. I think you're better off focusing on the Atlantic War and Mediterranean War and the Pacific and just ignoring the other part because the tempo is very different in the two. So I don't think that's necessarily worthwhile. But you can also play them individually, right? And if you really kind of want a more recent rules pass on this game, it is this game, then by all means check that out as well. Carl, thanks for stopping by. Or this may be just because of the nature of the system as applied to the topic, though, right? The Pacific War is a more interesting naval war than the Atlantic War, and it's hard to simulate, but it's easier to simulate than the Atlantic War, I think. Atlantic War, what are the characteristics of the Atlantic War? You've got, your submarine U-boats, wolf packs, right? You've got your convoys, you've got your surface raiders early on until they all get sunk. You've got attempts to run various blockades. You've got your Arctic convoys, which I'm pleased to say I have at least one game on. That's actually pretty fascinating. And you have, establishing air control over naval um, routes such as the English Channel, right? And then that enabling things like amphibious invasions. So that makes it sound like really interesting. But then the game takes a step back from a lot of that stuff, and it's kind of at the same abstract level as Victory in the Pacific. War at Sea predates Victory in the Pacific, so it's the earlier game. But I think the system works better for the Pacific because I think the Pacific the things that happened in the Pacific are a better match for the system scale wise than they are in War at Sea. Let me put it that way. And hopefully that's not completely cryptic. All right, next up, this might be the last one, actually. No, it's not. There's one more. War of the Ring. This is, I think we'll all have to agree, a somewhat dated game, right? Certainly graphically, it's, typical SPI of the time. High end SPI, though, right? I mean, I feel like whoever they had with the artists and who they did on the art on the cards and stuff like that is all um is all it had to be the same team that worked on Freedom in the Galaxy, right? There's a Howard Barish and Richard Berg design, okay, and we're talking about War of the Ring and not Gondor or what was the other one? Sauron, okay, neither of which were, in my opinion, particularly interesting. War of the Ring, on the other hand, is a pretty interesting game. It is, and if you know where to find them, and you have a chance to read the designer's notes, read the designers. If nothing else, if you don't go play the game, read the designer's notes. They're pretty interesting. Um, because functionally, the game has three sides, not two. Um, we got to get put that in its own compartment. Um, you have the Free Peoples, you have Sauron, and you have Saruman, and it's incredibly asymmetric, right? So, um, and the rule book tells you, and I feel like this is very Bergian actually to say, this was really not balanced because it's really not. Um, between especially with Saruman, right? Saruman has a really long shot and really has to play the other powers against each other successfully, and of course they know that too, right? So but it's a pretty interesting design. If you're really a Tolkien nerd, I think you'll get plenty of enjoyment out of the much more recent game called War of the Rings Second Edition, which I want to say is like the number one game on war list ranked war game on BGG right now. And I have played it, and it's excellent. I can't argue with that. Nevertheless, for those of a more simulationist bent, then I think this game is actually still worth a look. It is relatively expensive, unless you are willing to settle for a copy that's pretty beat up, in which case you got to think about whether it's complete or not. So buyer beware and all that stuff. But nevertheless, I think it's a pretty neat game. I think it's got a lot of flavor. It's certainly not as pretty as the more recent Tolkien games, including that War of the Ring, which I want to say is currently being published by Ares, but I believe it to be basically the same game that was earlier being published by Fantasy Flight. I could be getting all that wrong. Um, and like I said, that I played the current whatever the current edition is, and it is really good. To be fair, then again, I was enough of a Tolkien nerd to enjoy playing Lord of the Rings Risk that came out as a movie tie-in, and I actually still have that. That I got. I think it was for Christmas. My sister just, oh, he loves this Lord of the Rings thing. It's so stupid, but I'm going to buy these things for him. So I got a Lord of the Rings Risk and a Lord of the Rings Monopoly. And Lord of the Rings Monopoly was exactly as bad as you'd expect. But Lord of the Rings Risk was kind of shockingly fun. Is it an awesome game? No. But I have fun just pronouncing all of the cool names, right? So, um, but you can get that level of enjoyment out of War of the Ring here as well. Now, I'm also not saying, as Meandering Mike mentions, I'm also not saying that this is problem free. So, Eric from Eric's Table Napoleonic Battles is here. Now there is a second cover of this, which was a tie-in to the Ralph Bakshi animated movie, which actually does have some things going for it, but overall, I think we have to regard that as a failed effort to adapt the material. Starting with that, they didn't adapt the material; they adapted half of the material, which is troublesome. I do still have the Risk Lord of the Rings actually. I still have so over the years, a lot of copies of Risk passed through my hands, and I haven't played the thing in probably 25 years. But I actually have like a fancified copy of Risk with all the nicest pieces, like the board that I like the most, and the cards that I like the most, and the pieces that I like the most. Um, and I've still got that too. Not 100% sure where it's at, but it's over here somewhere. The rotoscoping was very, very inconsistent. In places, it was really good, and in other places, it was like, holy God, they ran out of time. So there are two versions of Lord of the Rings Risk. That's true. I'm not sure they're really different, other than having different covers. I could be wrong about that. I was not inclined to investigate it. So last up here is Wooden Ships and Iron Men. This is the classic Age of Sail war game. Um, so I mean, I feel like there's not any question that I am hard pressed to think of a scene in which I think the backsheet group did better. That said, remember that there were three different Lord of the Ringses. There's screen adaptations. There's the Bakshi Lord of the Rings. There's the Rankin Bass Return of the King, which really only handles the material from the third book, The Return of the King. Why they did it that way, I have no idea. And then there's the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings, which is a magnificent cinematic achievement, and I love it to bits. But I was butthurt when I, got out of the theater from the third one, and I'm like, this sucked. They all like the key scenes, except for one of them. They messed them up or left them out. There's like a number. I've talked about this before. Let me tab back because we're still talking about this. So the last game we'll talk about tonight is Wooden Ships and Iron Man, which is a magnificent game. Also a game by the late great S. Craig Taylor. So there's to me, and of the three volumes of the novel, because it's one novel broken into three books by the publisher. So of the three volumes of the Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King is my personal favorite. And there are a number of key scenes in that book that make me say that. Okay, those include the trying to get the sequence right in my head here. Um, and I'm having trouble, oddly enough. So the Battle of the Pelennor Fields in general, and specifically tied into that, you have Gandalf at the and the Witch King at the gates of Minas Tirith. You have Eowyn and the Witch King slightly later, and you have the charge of the Rohirrim. Um, in two of those three cases, as part of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, the Rankin Bass animated version does it better than Peter Jackson did. The charge of the Rohirrim in the Peter Jackson movie is amazing, and it's the better of the two. Eowyn and the Witch King is better in the Rankin Bass version. Peter Jackson completely leaves out Gandalf and the Witch King. It is in the extended version, but it's lame. So then later on in the book, you have Gandalf and the mouth of Sauron, well, the armies of the West. So, I mean, everybody's there at that point. And the mouth of Sauron at the Black Gate. That is also left out and then added into the extended version, but it's also lame, despite getting a great cast for the mouth. Bruce Spence as the mouth of Sauron. Wow, that's brilliant casting. Thanks for wasting him. So that scene's like not even in there and bad when they put it in. And then the other key scene, of course, is Frodo, Sam, and Gollum at the Cracks of Doom, which the Peter Jackson movies completely nail. So I have, mixed feelings about that third film, but two of those key scenes are done better in the Rankin Bass version, chiefly because they use Tolkien's dialogue, which Jackson does too a lot, but not exclusively. And a number of those other scenes just get left out, right? Or put in as afterthoughts into the extended versions. The movie also obviously leaves out the Scouring of the Shire, which I absolutely cannot blame the movie for. The ending was long enough. That said, I do feel like that in the book, it provides a needed coda to the rest of this action that you've already gone through. I know there are folks who disagree with that and who object to the 17 endings of the movie, but It's still a wonderful cinematic achievement, and overall was really really good. And frankly, none of the changes made to either, damn it, either of the first two films bothered me very much. Now, I did squawk at the in the first one that they left out. This is another thing that they leave out. Um, was the file of Galadriel. Um, where Frodo and Sam, I think it's Sam that actually uses it to pass the Watchers in Mordor. The files in there, but the Watchers are not. I was disappointed by that. They left out the gift giving scene. Again, it's in the time. Some of it is in the extended version of where Galadriel gives gifts to the Fellowship. I thought that's a really cool scene. Um, I'm not thrilled with what they did to Faramir, but I understand their reasons for doing that. Um, Also objectionable is the like absolutely ridiculous Legolas shit that got more ridiculous. It was completely tolerable in the first movie. It got silly in the second movie, but I dealt with it, and it got really ludicrous in the third movie. They left out Glorfindel. I don't blame them for that. I love Glorfindel. I think Glorfindel is awesome, but I cannot blame them for that. The Bakshi version replaces Glorfindel with Legolas, which is also fairly logical. But why not use Arwen? Actually, I think Arwen is actually the better choice there because it makes Arwen a character who doesn't get a lot of screen time, even in the book, but is really important to a lot of the book. Um, it gives her more screen time, and I think that's good. And it also emphasizes that she is, a descendant of Beren and Luthien too. She's really an important person. Um, in maybe not quite to the same degree as Glorfindel, but maybe more because she's descended from the union of the elves and men. So, um, six actual, not a problem. But we were going to talk about this for a little while. So, all right, I think we check out the yeah, it just became too much. It was too wuja at the end there. And a lot of the landscape is just New Zealand. That's what New Zealand looks like. So, and that's a good point. Yeah, Legolas was voiced by Anthony Daniels in the Bakshi version, and Aragorn was voiced by John Hurt. So, the key, one of the things that so we're going to do this again. One of the key things that both the Rankin Bass version of Return of the King and the Jackson version live action films have is a great Gandalf. And it's really I know Frodo's the main character, but a lot of the presence of the movie and the weight of the world is carried by Gandalf. So it's really important to have a strong Gandalf. Bakshi did not have a strong Gandalf. Ian McKellen, of course, in the Jackson films, and John Huston, who's magnificent voice on John Huston, um, in the Rankin Bass production, and that was a really good job. Now let's face it, they didn't pronounce all the names right, but we live with that. Is Close Action derived from Wooden Ships and Iron Men? Not in a meaningful way. I mean, they are both Age of Sail games. The scale is a little different. The Wooden Ships and Iron Men. Okay, so let me reorient my mental process here. Um, so there's three games that come up in the context, maybe four if we count Fighting Sail, in the context of Age of Sail war games. Okay, there's Wooden Ships and Iron Men, which is the big classic. There's Close Action from Clash of Arms. There's Flying Colors from GMT, Mike Nagel design. And there's Fighting Ships, also from from SPI magazine game. We've talked about that before, and I haven't actually played Fighting Ships, but I played all the others. Um, so Close Action is not derived from Wooden Ships and Iron Men, but it is clearly a game that set out to do what Wooden Ships and Iron Men did, but with an attempt at greater realism and more detail. Um, I actually feel like, now bear in mind, I haven't had a lot of play experience with um, Frigate. That's a good point. I don't think that's as well remembered as Flying Colors, or Fighting Ships. Um, Wooden Ships and Iron Man is pretty detailed, right? It's a ship to ship game. All right. The intention is that you, the player, are controlling a ship or two, maybe three, and really you start to get too much to juggle after that point. Close action is even tighter than that. It's a ship or two. Whereas Flying Colors is a squadron game, and it is built so you have like a more detailed module that you could stick in there to give you more detail if you're playing a small number of ships. But it's generally supposed to be small fleet on small fleet actions. But they've also scaled that all the way up to huge battles like Trafalgar, right? So, I actually to me, and a lot of it's just the way the sheet looks, right? Because you got a sheet with boxes that you check off as you take damage and stuff like that. So there's a definitely a feel component to close action that is similar to the feel component of Starfleet battles. So I think that is a fair statement. Fighting sail, yes, correct. Thank you, Michael Kirk, and everybody else who has corrected me on that. Modeling the wind and the weather gauge and all that in an Age of Sail game is actually very difficult. So, Flying Colors is very good, and you got unlike so there are several expansions for um, close action if you want more close action, and but basically that's just more scenarios, right? Whereas in the case of Flying Colors, you've got like several big boxed expansions, and a lot of scenarios, and it covers a lot of different corners of conflicts in the Age of Sail. Um, I have a pretty strong positive opinion of Flying Colors. It is a lot easier to get than close action, and it's certainly a lot easier to learn. So, all right, so that is the last of these. So let me pull this down, and we have about half an hour to talk about whatever we want. So if folks have questions, I will be delighted to try to answer them, and I'll get a time to actually read the chat. So that's a novel luxury that I don't usually get. Doug says that fighting still is really good, and they wish they had time to develop that more. And in fact, that's kind of the liability of Flying Colors is of fighting sail. That you don't get that many scenarios. There's a few in there, and there's probably some more that have been put up somewhere. But you got more scenarios in a bigger package like Wooden Ships and Iron Men. That's a blank counter. And then, in a series like Close Action or Flying Colors, you have a very large number of scenarios. And there's a new volume in the Flying Colors series coming eventually from GMT. Bismuth is Sovereign of the Sea by Compass is a joy to play, but the map needs to be larger. I've heard mixed things about that game. That is a strategic level naval game, Age of Sail naval game, though, is it not? Am I mixing that up with something else? And if so, if I'm right, though, that's a very different animal than something like a Wooden Ships and Iron Man or Close Action or whatever. Um, Ed Holtzman asks about Nevsky at Rally the Troops. This is a website that'll let you play games online. Not sure I'm super familiar with it. I've taken a peek at it, and that's it. So no to Nevsky. Inferno should be showing up at any time, however, here at Ardwulf's Lair. So hopefully that's why actually one reason why I didn't do a unboxing video yet is I'm hoping that this week's will be Inferno, but I'm also not going to bet any actual money that UPS will get it to me on time. So yes, indeed it does, and a lot of them are the rectangular 1 inch, half inch by 1 inch counters, so it's fairly difficult to store. Oh yeah, so there's some really interesting communications rules in Flying Colors, not Flying Colors, Close Action too, by the way. I am also hearing good things about the Nevsky implementation over there, but I just haven't had the chance to look at it. Garrison Venn asked about SCS versus Zocbond. We covered this a little bit on the show with Dan, I think last week, but I'll be happy to talk about it again. Generally speaking, so SCS games vary somewhat in overall complexity. Okay, the core rules are really, really, really simple. They're 8 pages, seven and a half, whatever pages of core rules. Um, and some of the games have very little on top of that, right? Bastogne, very little on top of that. Mighty Endeavor, not too much, there's a little bit more. When you get up to like Day of Days or something like that, and they have to add a lot of overhead and game specific rules, that's where I feel that SCS tends to break down as a game, but also where it becomes more complicated. So if we take our standard 1 to 9 scale, 1 being the easiest and the 9 being the most complex, I personally would put SCS at about a 4. I think it's very easy, and any but the most burdensome SCS games, and there are a few, are not much harder than the core rules. Um, the Zachman series are more detailed all around. I would put them at about a 5.5 personally, in complexity. They are designed so it's not really a series in the sense that there's a series rule book. There's a lot of shared mechanics, but there's a lot of little tweaks and adjustments made to fine tune any individual game in that series, so that they're easy to just like learn a new one. But there are also going to be things that you have to understand work differently in the new one that you're learning, right? So got the same color, yes. Those are the Italians. Um, they're both really worthwhile. The Zachbon series has been pretty much limited to World War II. SCS is not. So if you really, really wanted SCS World War One, there's SCS World War One, and several of those games are supposed to be really good, by the way. The World War One SCS games, that is. Phase Line Smash, yes, ugly game, but it is supposed to be a pretty good game from what I understand. Ooh, yeah, Desert Island Games. I did a whole show on Desert Island Games, but that was like a year ago, and there's nothing that says I got to be consistent and say the same thing. Where I am right now, one game with so I'm going to take this as not one game system, where I could take like all the OCS for example. Um, if it's going to be one game, I'd probably say World in Flames. So that's where I am on that question today. If you ask me that same question in a year, you might get a completely different answer, or a month, or next week. I have never played with the written orders thing in SFB. I gotta tell you that. Oh, that's gonna be very interesting and possibly uncomfortable. I don't know what's going on with that. So John Stanley asked if I'll be doing an unboxing of Worthington's 7 Days. I'm not planning to. They aren't sending me a copy, and I didn't buy it. So that's the Civil War Brigade battle system. I do have some playthrough on that. This is, I want to say, the third game in the series. The first one was, okay, I forget which one was first, but the two previous games were Antietam and Shiloh. And we didn't like Antietam very much. The basic system is actually works pretty well. It's very easy, easier than Blind Swords. Uh, but it also is somewhat less flavorful than Blind Swords, in my opinion. The We did like Shiloh. We thought it was pretty good. We did find that the Antietam, the way Antietam is set up, there are magic hexes that you have to fight over just because those are the hexes that were fought over, and you're not given reasons to fight over them other than that those are the victory point hexes. And I don't think that that's a particularly desirable design feature. 7 Days battles is a bunch of different battles. So I'm real curious to see that. I think that this system will work well for them. They're smaller battles, generally speaking, than Shiloh or Antietam. I'm interested in it but not to the extent that I felt obligated to buy it. So if you're asking for my opinion on that system, I think it's pretty good, but it's also dependent on which exact game we're talking about, right? Okay. Gift dealer, I'm a little confused about what you're talking about, unless there's some news that's broken that I'm not aware of, which is always possible. This is true. They are not. They're all at a fairly similar scale, but they're not all the same scale. Salerno is definitely a different scale than even Normandy 44. The Holland 44 is a different scale. The Normandy 44 is and Stalingrad 42 are the ones with the weirder scale, but they're generally regiments or battalions. In Stalingrad 42, I think they're divisions. Okay, this looks interesting. This sounds interesting. Is this coming or is this out? That's in the 1914 series. So I assume we're talking about the Mike Resch 1914 Offensiva Outrance and Twilight in the East and Zerbian Moose Sterbian. Um, I have all three. I have not actually played them. They look really promising. There's a new rule book out that you can get, I believe, on Consim World and maybe on Mike Resch's webpage that I would recommend using that because it's going to represent a lot easier way to play it. The rule book is a difficult rule book. It's not Goss difficult, but it's still a difficult rule book. But the game looks really promising. All three of those games look pretty promising. Red Strike. I am not in the loop on Red Strike, so I can't tell you anything about that. So this Europa Universalis actually looks. This is the new Europa Universalis, I presume. The Kickstarters have gotten delivered over the last couple of months. This actually looks kind of interesting. It's got like a 60 or 70 page rule book, so that's something. So Jeff, I'm not sure what you're continuing to post in the chat. It's just the random. Are they just random game descriptions from BGG or what? I don't. There has been some video on some of these. Uh, I'm trying to remember who did video on this, but there has been some video on this. I will check Chits and Cats though. Actually, I will immediately Chad Kennedy. I will immediately buy Cross Channel Attack as well. But I am not. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Cross Channel Attack. When I was in on the playtest very early on, and I thought it was pretty rough. Oh, okay, that explains it, Jeff. Thank you. World at War 91 mega feedback preliminary round. Is that a poll that is still open? Tabletop Edge, thanks for stopping by. I was aware that Callendale has done that, but that's not who I was thinking of. Because I actually haven't watched um Callendale's content on those. Maybe I have. I don't know. I've watched a lot of Callendale, so I assume that this was the new fancy Europa Universalis. I am positive that I wouldn't. Well, I'm not positive, but I have a good feeling about those 1914 games personally. So yeah, and it's been mentioned that Just a Guard has covered it as well. So I was thinking of doing a show on just like the game series that I'm following, but I'm not quite sure how to structure that yet. But in any case, next week's topic is already set up. It is well, the show's not set up, but the topic's set up. It's good. We're going to finish off our Avalon Hill series, and eventually we'll come back to SPI. I think, but we'll probably do it in a slightly more constrained way than we've done um, thus far. I actually feel like there's potential here. Now, I haven't played TCS, right? So I'm kind of talking out of my ass, but I do feel like there is potential for TCS in Vietnam. And in the Ziploc format, I think there's a lot of small actions, relatively small actions, that you could do at that scale that would work well and still be fittable in a Ziploc bag. So I would encourage them to explore that. but I don't know what the design space looks like for TCS right now. Is there a honcho? I don't know. Who do they have designing TCS games? I do know Goose Green has been in the works for quite a long time. So eh, so this is yeah. So for those unfamiliar with the history, so there's a French publisher, Azure Wish Publications, I think, or Azure Wish Games or something like that, that produced the original Europa Universalis. Okay. A board game. And there is video on the original board game, by the way. One of the designers or the designer of Europa Universalis eventually ended up with Paradox, and Paradox developed a computer game. There was soon a Europa Universalis 2 and a Europa Universalis 3, and now they're on Europa Universalis 4, and they're probably working on Europa Universalis 5. The video game, and I'm talking now about 4, which is the current video game, is really good. It's got a lot to it. I've played probably 100 hours of it scattered over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, and it's a well designed, well developed, but really complicated, and therefore they kind of have to constantly patch it. A game, and you can certainly get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I absolutely have the sense that the new Europa Universalis board game borrows much, much, much more from the video game than the decades removed or Europa Universalis original game from Azure Wish. So Doug mentions Azure Wish editions, which of course is correct. Jed Kennedy cannot get over the Der Weltkrieg maps. A lot of people can't. But I found that after about a turn or two of Tannenberg, I was used to them, except in those areas where you can't tell where the hexes are. That's a pain. How complex is TCS compared to other game MMP systems? I would so in a hand wavy, approximation way, I would set it next to Line of Battle. It's not as complicated as OCS. It's probably more complicated than BCS. It's definitely more complicated than SCS. So in that sense, and I think it's comparable to say Civil War Brigade series as well. So it's very pretty. I watched an unboxing video of it. It's very pretty. We will see it on a table at Winterfest. So, any Falklands games Hex Encounter covering the entire campaign? Hex Encounter is going to be the tough ask here. I think there might be a couple. There might be something that showed up in Modern War magazine or S&T. But there hasn't been a lot of coverage on the Falklands War. There have been a couple of things. Mrs. Thatcher's War, off the top of my head, but that's not Hex Encounter. Hex Encounter, like I said, a lot of the stuff that I'm aware of is not Hex Encounter. They're war games, but they're not Hex Encounter. Another thing is that you can go to the gamersarchive.com. Is it your .com? Gamersarchive.net, and download all the rules and all the materials and all the stuff that you want for any of the Gamers games except for OCS, which is now at ocsdepot.com. So you could go check those out, right? You don't have to take my word for it. Port Stanley is an interesting pick. Mayfair had a Falklands game. I think I vaguely remember that. Where There Was Discord was another game that I had in my head. That's also not Hex Encounter. It's attractive, but it's not Hex Encounter. I'd probably, if I was like, boy, this Falklands War thing was really interesting. I would probably run down Mrs. Thatcher's War. I would take a look at that, even though it's not Hex Encounter. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that conflict makes much sense as a Hex Encounter game covering the entire conflict. Let me put it that way. Perfidious Albion says that TCS is probably similar to the last 100 yards with the addition of writing rules. Yeah, I would say that this, having glanced through last 100 yards and not played it, I think this is basically accurate. I think there's another counter sheet that comes with the 1814 game as well, and there is video on Mrs. Thatcher's War as well. That is true. Chad Canady, it's funny you should ask. Stay tuned. I may be able to upstage you on that or upstage myself. Where there is Discord, I have seen it that it is expensive. Yes. So I don't believe the statement is being made that TCS is particularly similar to Last 100 Yards, only that it is a little bit less complicated, which I believe is an accurate assessment at a first approximation. All right, E4 Airman, thanks very much for stopping by. We are in the closing moments of the show here, folks. So we have a show with Dan tomorrow that is going to be on the topic of the golden age of wargaming. So we're going to talk about the whole golden age, silver age, bronze age nonsense tomorrow, which I think is nonsense a lot of the time, but clearly there is a periodization of commercial hobby wargaming that we could accomplish, that we could kind of nail down, that I don't know that anybody has nailed down other than to say the SPI era or the Avalon Hill era or whatever. I think there are broader trends that we can maybe identify with that. I'm not sure that the show with Dan will be the correct vehicle to do that, but we can at least get people thinking about it and talking about it. So that'll be good. And that's tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. on this channel, Eastern Standard Time. Then Thursday we should have something. If hopefully we'll actually get a video out, and then Friday we have the video with Justin Facino, a designer of Seljuk, which is a very interesting looking new Levian campaign series game. I did get my made the cut notice on the Nevsky upgrade kit for the second edition Nevsky, by the way, which I have ordered because I think Nevsky's pretty neat. So this is true. I mean, there's a real gap in caveman war games. I mean, really, we could have a whole genre of caveman war games. So I'm gonna defer this until this is honestly probably going to be a few months before we can get back to this. As much as I would love to, there are a couple of reasons why I don't feel up to it right now. I may, however, be able to come back with a bang when we come back with Traveler Tuesday. So there are a few caveman war games. Or war games is really the right word if you're fighting two guys with sticks. So I think we are actually going to wrap a couple of minutes early tonight because I'm pretty much out of material, and I don't know that I want to just extemporaneize until for another 8 minutes, just for the sake of keeping everybody on board. If Eric is still in, Eric, are you streaming Labatai or BAR tonight? Because if so, I will recommend that folks stop by your channel after this. Fucko, have a good night. We'll see you pretty soon. So I'll also mention, I guess, there's very, very, very little on ancient Mesopotamia too. Let me point that out. Yep, Eric is doing Lini tonight, so stop by his channel to see some Labatai play. Planet of the Cave. Remember, my wife is a big fan of those books. I saw the movie and don't really remember much about it, to be honest. Perfidious Albion mentions the Sumerians, and this is actually really ancient Mesopotamia is actually a really interesting topic. And there hasn't been a whole lot in that space that's not like so abstract as to be meaningless like civilization. Now we do have Chariots of Fire from the Great Battles of History series, and we do have Genesis, which is a Richard Berg card-driven design from GMT, which I have but haven't played. It's multiplayer. That makes it a pain. I am not doing here. So here's the thing: since about August or so, well, really October, I haven't done 5 videos a week. I've been lucky to get 3. This week I have a couple extra things that got set up. I do want to do some more live stuff because live stuff is easier to do in some ways. But the house is definitely not self-repairing. I can attest to that. So it hasn't just been home repairs and stuff. It's been a lot of different things that have come up, and and I'll be honest, the CSRs are a factor as well. So, and I got to get something out about them to literally tomorrow. So, All right, folks. We are going to wrap just there you go. There you go. I should have seen that coming. In any event, uh, somebody probably did this. There was an ancient Mesopotamia add-on to the game. I want to say from Green Ronin, in fact. Um, and a lot of interesting things. Vicky, have a great night. The trees are self-felling. Yeah, so we did have one of the tree guys, cheap local tree guy, came in to take down a couple of small trees that are in danger of falling down, and at least get the wood on the ground and cut up into manageable pieces. At which point, I can spend the next 10 years splitting firewood. Okay. The Cave Master RPG. That's a good point too. There have been a few RPGs. RuneQuest is thoroughly Bronze Age, but there are Stone Age things in it. I'm not sure that that's terminology I would want to use now with the current edition, but I'm kind of Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is pretty good. I mean, a lot of the early Genesis with Gabriel was really good. Selling England by the Pound is a really good album. But and the God Kings from Compass. There's a few. Those are really high level, though. I don't think those are necessarily giving you a thorough picture. I don't know. That's me leaning more into the detailed strategic or operational stuff, and that stuff's very thin on the ground for tactical. Now there are a few like battles, Kadash or I forget how that's either spelled. I've seen it spelled a couple of different ways. I think it's Kadash, which is an an ancient battle. I think involving the Egyptians and somebody else, but I forget who. And that battle's popped up in a few different places. There was a game in Against the Odds about it. I think it was Against the Odds. And there's, I believe, a scenario for it's not Kadash. I forget what it is. Campaigns of King David. That actually sounds interesting, but then I looked at it and I'm like, this doesn't look that interesting. This might be the game I'm thinking of, actually. Um, was there there's a I believe in Chariots of Fire, there's a GBOH version of that battle as well. So don't even talk to me about that, Eric Hansen. Don't even want to hear about it. Campaigns of King David might be fascinating actually. But I looked at it and looking at it didn't impress me. I had Kadesh at one point pass through my hands, and I let it go, and I'm good. I've got the GBOH version, so I'm happy with that. This is actually true. A lot of like the details of exactly how those chariots got used on the actual battlefield. A lot of that stuff's kind of still up in the air, considering that the records from them are either sparse or concern are basically accounting logbooks. Civilization does start in the Stone Age, but civilization doesn't really correspond to history in any meaningful way either. Either the Francis Tresham board game, or really any of the computer games, even less so. The computer games are just fantasy games, as far as I'm concerned. They don't make any sense to me, and that's one reason why. Although I played the crap out of Civ 2 back in the Civ 2 days, I really haven't been able to get into any of the more recent ones, despite having bought Civ 3. That's long gone because that was on a physical disc. I have Civ 4, Civ 5, and Civ 6 on Steam. Haven't really spent more than an hour in any one of them. Yeah, so I mean, this has always been a part of the Glorantha setting, and has been kind of built into RuneQuest. Um, it is not a. I mean, there's Neolithic or hunter gatherer societies on the planet right now, right? Let alone back in the Bronze Age. So, uh, yeah, we're not going to get into this topic. I think. Josiah is pretty cool. It's Euro-y. I'll agree with that, but it's better tied to actual history than almost any Euro. So I wouldn't call it a Euro for that reason. But mechanically, it's pretty Euro-y, right? To me, what makes a Euro is if it's a historical game at all, and a lot of them aren't, they don't even try to be, is a thin layer of theming over a very mechanical base. Okay, that to me is the defining characteristic of what makes it a Euro. Otherwise, it may be merely borrowing from Euros. I think the theming of Versailles 1919 is really strong, which sets it apart from anything that I would personally call a Euro. I got super duper into Rome, the first Rome Total War, and the first medieval Total War, and I'm not really able to get into any of the more recent stuff, to be honest, for much the same reason as the Civ games. I mean, Civ 5's put it on a hex map. I like hex maps. Hex maps are cool. I mean, I'm not saying any of those games, those Civ games, are bad. The the Avalon Hill Civilization game, I like I said, I played the hell out of that. That's a terrific game, but it's not a historical game in any way that means anything. It has a thin veneer of historicity about it. So in that sense, it's quite a Euro-y game, right? It may in fact be one of the precursors to that. Think about it. There's like no dice. It's all mechanics. It's pretty simple, but there's a lot of fiddly bits in it too, with a thin veneer of historical theme on it, right? So I think it may be, without looking at the timetable of what things were happening in actual Europe and Germany, where Euros, quote unquote, arose as a popular thing, without having looked at that timeline at all. That does make me kind of feel like Civilization, the board game, is a precursor to that. Some Euros are quite complicated. It's not true to say Euros are all really simple. That I will absolutely agree to that. So I mean, for me, the appeal of the game tends to be in the theme and in the exploration of the theme, right? And the themes that I like are often historical themes. So we play war games, right? Euros, to me, one of the characteristics that makes it a Euro, over and above whatever mechanics it may use, and there are certainly mechanical characteristics as well, is that unsatisfying exploration of theme. Um, which I won't say is, universal among Euros, but that's how I feel about it. And there are some excellent Euro style games that I like too, by the way. But those tend to be games that doesn't apply to. One of the games where I think a very well developed theme is Lords of Waterdeep, completely a Euro. But it does a very good job of developing its theme of, hey, here's some people in Waterdeep having adventures and stuff. So, and that's really cool. So, all right, folks, we are going to call it. We did not cut it off early after all. So tune in tomorrow with Dance and Dan. We will talk about Golden Age, Silver Age, and all that jazz. And then tune in Friday, and you'll get to see both me and Justigard, our friend Justigard from the Justigard channel, talking about Seljuk and whatever else we can squeeze in an hour or so. So I'd like to wish everybody a good night. Thanks for coming. Please remember to thumbs up the video. If you'd like to help support the channel, probably the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link to the Patreon in the video description. So thank you, patrons. And thank everybody for watching who is watching, and thank everybody who is still watching for hanging through I think a fairly spotty show for the remainder.